Okay, I think we're ready to begin. My name is Blair Rubel, and I'm director of the Kennan Institute, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this event on behalf of Wilson Center President and Director Lee Hamilton. Before I introduce a couple of the speakers, I want to go through some administrative details which are important for this afternoon. The first is please turn off, not just silence, but turn off all electronic communication devices because they interfere with the sound system in the room. And that's particularly important today because we're doing a webcast and we have an overflow room downstairs. And if suddenly your device, even if it's silenced, goes off, it may cut off the sound to the people listening in cyberspace. Also, because we're webcasting, I have to ask that everyone please use a microphone. Frequently people believe that they speak loudly enough so that they don't need a microphone, but as loudly as you can speak, it's not going to be picked up in the webcast unless you do use a microphone. So when time comes for questions and answers, please use the microphones and speak clearly. Finally, and more happily, there'll be a reception after the event. If you don't have an opportunity to get your question answered, there'll be an opportunity to follow up more personally and directly, and also to just enjoy a little hospitality. So please think about staying after for the reception. For those of you who don't know the Wilson Center, we are the official memorial to the nation's 28th president, Woodrow Wilson, who was the only American president to have a PhD. And therefore, that may be a good thing, I don't know. But he happens to be unique. Some people think Jimmy Carter might have had a PhD because he was a nuclear engineer, but no, he didn't. Only Woodrow Wilson did. And therefore, when it came time to establish a national memorial to Wilson, the idea was to combine the world of scholarship with the world of public affairs, and to do so with an international focus since he was an internationalist, hence the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and I welcome you here. I also want to take an opportunity to thank our co-sponsors this afternoon, the Washington Kazakhstan Festival, the U.S. Kazakhstan Business Association, and the Embassy of Kazakhstan. I should mention also Joe Dresden on the Wilson Center staff, the Kennan Institute staff, who pulled together today's event. So if you see Joe after the event at the reception, be sure to thank him for making this event possible. I now have the distinct and special pleasure of introducing Ambassador of the Republic of Kazakhstan to the United States, His Excellency Irlan Idrisov. Ambassador Idrisov was educated at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations and at the Diplomatic Academy in Moscow, earning his degrees in international relations and international economic relations. He served in several important posts throughout his career. His initial posting was in Pakistan. He also served as First Secretary of the Permanent Mission of Kazakhstan to the United Nations, head of the American Department and Ambassador at Large in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan. He was assistant to the President of Kazakhstan on international issues, first Vice Minister and then Minister of Foreign Affairs, and later Ambassador of Kazakhstan to the United Kingdom, Norway, Sweden, Ireland, and Brazil. He's been Ambassador to the United States since July 4th, 2007. As you will note, many of these postings have put him at the center of very dynamic global international economic relationships and trends over the past 2 decades. And I won't say that it was because he was posted in these various places, but I suspect that he was posted in them because of his background in international economic affairs. So it is with great pleasure that I invite His Excellency Ambassador Idrisov to the stage.
I hope my phone is off and I will be speaking into the mic. Thank you very much for this most eloquent introduction. I don't know whether my Moscow certificates reach up to the PhD level, but thank you for giving so much detail in introducing me. It is my great honor and pleasure to open this fantastic event. I think that this is one of the star events in our Kazakhstan-Washington Festival, which we launched last April with the support of the Smithsonian Institution. I'd like to thank our friends from the Smithsonian Institution for this wonderful support of this cultural event of Kazakhstan in the United States. We would like to thank you, the Kennan Institute and the Woodrow Wilson Center for supporting this unique event. I am very proud to be able to open this because the uniqueness of this event is it is because it is trying to reach out to the general American public. We have now the abundance of think tank events related to our part of the world, and I'm very pleased to see the quite different audience. Of course, I see many familiar faces of friends, but the idea was to reach out to general public and to get our message to a broader audience. In a way, as I always joke, we are trying to do what Borat has started to do. He placed Kazakhstan on the map in a way, but I think that he should be proud to have such a powerful panel to support his effort. I am very pleased to introduce this, to recognize this great panel. Bill will, of course, will have a proper introduction, but I know all these people personally, and this is really a history in the making. Ambassador Collins was ambassador of the United States in Russia, in the emerging new Russia, or the new old Russia, I don't know. Ambassador will explain will explain better, but he was in the most important years of the emergence of that part of the world. We have 3 ambassadors of the United States to Kazakhstan, and they all are entitled to have the first categories, because Ambassador Courtney was the first ambassador of the United States to Kazakhstan, and he, of course, had to live through all these hardships of establishing the embassy in the then capital of Almaty, when there was no infrastructure for international presence. And I remember, and he remembers, how foreign diplomats, a small group of foreign diplomats who first came to Kazakhstan, were scared by the earthquake stories about Kazakhstan. They were residing in the only tall rise in Almaty in Kazakhstan hotel, and with the first shake they would run away and come up to a small office of the foreign office asking us what to do in that situation. Ambassador Beth Jones is the first lady ambassador of the United States to Kazakhstan and our part of the world, and she was the one who introduced, among other important political things, she introduced baseball in Kazakhstan. And that baseball team continues to live in Kazakhstan. And the boys, I don't know how old they are and how successful they are in baseball, but you definitely left an imprint. And Ambassador Jones was the only ambassador on the foothills skiing resort of Chimbulak, and she was snowboarding. Snowboarding then was something unfamiliar, particularly for the lady ambassador, so she was a pioneer in many respects in Kazakhstan. Ambassador Larry Napa is an old friend, and I'm so pleased to see you, because I see quite frequently Bill and Beth here in Washington, D.C., and Larry is in Texas. But he also had the title and category for the first, because we were together with him establishing the first hotline, if you remember.
I was going to mention that later.
Yeah.
You stole my line, John.
I remember we personally dealt with that, and it was a successful story. And that was, of course, right after the tragic events in New York and here in Washington, after the terrorist attack. And that was yet another sign of confidence building between our two nations. Martha Olcott is a connoisseur of our part of the world, and she comes from the ancient school of criminologists, you know. Her first book of the Kazakhs was devoted to the Soviet time period, Soviet time Kazakhstan, and she based it on the studies of the Kunaev and the tribalism in Kazakhstan, etc., etc. And it was so fascinating to see the evolution of the academic thought and understanding by Martha of our part of the world. And I am absolutely happy that Martha continues to devote her knowledge and time to trying to help other people to understand the basic roots and culture and values of our part of the world. So we have a fantastic combination here. Bill Will, who is the moderator of today's event, is the president, director, or the head of the U.S.-Kazakh Business Association, yet another institution which successfully developed over this time. And Bill is the one who knows Kazakhstan maybe better than me. And therefore, he is moderating today's event. The essence of what we wanted to have today is to reach out to our friends in America and to offer Kazakhstan through the eyes of your countrymen who served there, who lived with in our culture, who understand our culture. This is an important turning point in our history. We, at this point in time, can say that there is no way back to the system we so enthusiastically wanted to run away from. But it doesn't mean that we already are on a complete good footing, firm footing. We are still the job in process, the work in progress. We have achieved a lot, but we completely understand that a lot more is to be done, and we also understand that we will not be able to be successful unless we rely on partnerships, on friendships with other countries, and the United States is one of the most important strategic partners of Kazakhstan, although it is distanced very far as compared to other neighbors of Kazakhstan. Washington Festival's purpose is to do that particular effort. We have a series of a mixture of events. We have classical cultural presentations. We bring the modern art of Kazakhstan. We bring the folklore groups of Kazakhstan. Particularly in this Woodrow Wilson Center in October, we'll have the a presentation called The Musical Map of Kazakhstan, where we'll have a Kazakh musical expert and the American musical expert talk about, in front of the audience, talk about the Kazakh music with the performers, with a group of performers from different parts of Kazakhstan. We want to bring the Kazakh Film Festival. Some of the films are quite familiar, particularly the new film, Gift to Stalin, about the Stalin period, when the nuclear bomb was born in the former Soviet Union, was tested on the territory of Kazakhstan, and that was unfortunately also the place for the huge chunk of the Gulag archipelago of the Stalin regime. So we would like to welcome you to our events. I expect, and I'm actually excited to listen to the revelations of this great panel, and I expect to learn so many new things from them, to count in my own efforts here. I would like to welcome all the friends. Thank you for your interest. We are hailing from the ancient times. We Kazakhs are nomads. This is the sign of my nomadic ancestry, the horse rider. We say that we are a newly emerged nation. This is partly true because in terms of political and modern history, of course, we are young. But in terms of ancient history, we come and we hail from the one of the early walks of life of a human race, the nomadic walk of life, which gave so many things to the human civilization which we today take for granted. I famously always say that we invented the stirrups, which allowed us to keep that huge territory for ourselves. We invented the fork, the nomadic walk of life invented the fork, the pants, etc., etc. So it's an amazing part of our life, and we are enormously proud of our great history. We do not want to overestimate or underestimate other pages in our history. The Soviet period is a reality. We cannot reject or delete it from our history, from our memories. It is part of our life. Our parents and grandparents come from that part of our history. Therefore, we have to take it in a very decent way. We want to recognize, of course, and not forget the bad, tragic pages in our Soviet history, but we also recognize that there were a number of good things which happened during the Soviet period, particularly the education, related to industrialization, and many other aspects. But the most important part is the expectations and ambitions with which we look into the future. Therefore, I think the philosophy of this talk, as we saw it, was a link between the history we hail from and the future, a great future which we want to build for ourselves with the support of our partners. Therefore, I'd like to thank you, the great panelists, our great friends of Kazakhstan, for being with us today, for devoting your very precious time. I know how busy you are, and I would hope that we'll have a very lively and interesting discussions which will help you to understand Kazakhstan much better and our part of the world much better, and will encourage you to go and try that part of the world by yourselves. Kazakhstan, among other things, important political and economic things, business things, is also a very interesting tourist destination. By the way, just a week ago, I think the Condé Nast magazine has devoted the entire issue to Kazakhstan. It's Condé Nast K, and it is out of print, I think, just a few days ago. So enjoy today's event. Of course, would be happy to welcome you, to join in welcoming you for our reception. And please know that the Embassy of Kazakhstan's doors are open 24 hours a day, and we want to be as friendly to you as possible in all our endeavors. Thank you very much.
Well, I'd like to thank the ambassador. I knew that he would place this meeting in perspective, but I didn't realize how personal it would be, because I don't think I ever thought of the time Martha and I were at Moscow State University at the same time. I never thought of that as ancient history before. But he rescued the my sense of depression over being realizing I participated in ancient history by talking about how history can be linked to the future. So I think that that's a very important concept. I now will turn the floor over to William Veal, who is Executive Director of the U.S.-Kazakhstan Business Association, and he will moderate the discussion this afternoon. He has played a pivotal role in U.S.-Kazakhstan relations really over the past decade or more. He's become a familiar face, certainly in the last decade, at economic and academic forums on Kazakhstan and Central Asia more broadly. He served as a Foreign Service officer and held several important posts. His last assignment was Foreign Policy Advisor to the Special Coordinator for Cooperative Threat Reduction in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, where he was responsible for the non-Lugar counterproliferation assistance programs. He also worked closely with NASA on international space cooperation. And during his career, he had postings in Burma and Berlin and in France. He's a graduate of Georgetown, where he earned both graduate and undergraduate degrees. He saw service in the U.S. Army as an officer in Germany and in Vietnam, and he taught political science at the U.S. Air Force Academy. So like Woodrow Wilson, he combined the life of public affairs with the life of the mind. So Bill, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Blair. That was an over-the-top type of introduction. I appreciate it. I want to extend some thanks of my own, first off, to all of you out there for coming in the middle of a hot, muggy summer day in Washington to this event. But I think that says a lot about interest in Kazakhstan. I also want to add my thanks to what's already been said to Joe Dresden and his staff here at the Center for all the logistical things they've done to make this work today. And of course, I want to thank each of the panelists, some of who came from quite a ways away, to really make this thing the kind of event that you're going to see today. And also I want to thank Ambassador Drisov, because it was his idea his idea that led to this event that you're participating in now. I'm going to start by introducing each of the panelists in the order in which they're going to speak, basically give you a little bit of background about them, and they will be speaking for 10 minutes each, right? And then we will have a Q&A session. Actually, we'll try and have a few minutes for them to talk back to each other about the things that they say. Then we'll open it up as a Q&A session with you. And then, of course, after that, Ambassador Drisov will have some closing remarks, and then we'll go across the hall to the reception. Well, first, let me start out. I want to, by the way, add one other important thanks here. One of our member companies, and I understand also a supporter of the center here, ConocoPhillips, has been a sponsor of this event today, and I want to particularly thank ConocoPhillips for that very important support. Our first speaker will be Ambassador James Collins on my far right. Ambassador Collins is currently the director of the Russia and Eurasia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace here in Washington. He served as ambassador to the Russian Federation from 1997 to 2001. And in the immediate period after that, before he went with Carnegie, he was a senior advisor to the law firm here in Washington, Aiken, Gump, Strauss, Hauer, and Feld. He served as ambassador at large and special advisor to the Secretary of State for the new independent states in the mid-90s. Now, some of you may know that that was really an assistant secretary of state type of position, but in that point for all the former Soviet countries. He was deputy chief of mission and charge d'affaires in the American embassy in Moscow from 1990 to 1993, in other words, the time that the Soviet Union was collapsing. And he had previous diplomatic postings in Moscow as well as in Amman, Jordan, and in Izmir, Turkey. He's received many awards from the State Department and from the Defense Department, and also a medal from NASA, as I note here. He serves currently on the boards of several nonprofit organizations, including the U.S.-Russia Business Council, the American Academy of Diplomacy, the Open World Leadership Center, and the American Councils for International Education. He also taught at the Naval Academy earlier before coming into the Foreign Service. Our next speaker will be Ambassador William Courtney, who, as Ambassador Drisov pointed out, was the first American ambassador. I've known Bill for quite a number of years. We worked in the open forum in the State Department on a project for back in I guess that was in the 70s or 80s, yeah. Anyway, Bill is currently the Director for Strategy and Development of the CSC Corporation, which some of you may recall used to be the Computer Sciences Corporation. And before that, he was Senior Vice President for National Security Programs at the DynCorp. During his, I guess it was after retiring from the Foreign Service, he was co-chair of the U.S. delegation to the 1999 Review Conference of the Organization for Cooperation and Security in Europe, which prepared the 1999 OSCE Summit in Istanbul, Turkey. This is topical, of course, because you know Kazakhstan is chairing the OSCE now, and there's an effort to have the first summit since the one that Bill was involved with. He served as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director of the National Security Council staff for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. He was Ambassador to Georgia, and he was, as I mentioned, the first Ambassador to Kazakhstan. He led negotiations to eliminate strategic nuclear weapons in Kazakhstan, and this included Project Sapphire, that some of you may know involved the removal of 600 kilograms of highly enriched uranium from Kazakhstan for safekeeping into the United States. He was the first commissioner to the Bilateral Consultative Commission involved with implementing the Threshold Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and he was engaged with initial talks with the Soviet Union and then Russia on the safety, security, and dismantlement of nuclear weapons. And that effort paved the way for something I was involved in, with, as you heard, the Non-Nuclear Cooperative Threat Reduction Program. He was deputy U.S. negotiator in the U.S.-Soviet defense and space talks in Geneva, and he was a special assistant to the Undersecretary for Political Affairs, and also in the Office of Strategic Nuclear Policy in the State Department. And he'd had overseas assignments in Moscow and in Brasilia, and is a recipient of the Presidential Meritorious Rank Award. He hails from West Virginia, is that correct? And went to the University of West Virginia Wesleyan College and Brown University, and he was a fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Our next speaker will be Ambassador Elizabeth Jones, who was in her last assignment in the government, was Assistant Secretary for the European and Eurasian Affairs in the first Bush term, first George W. Bush term. She is presently Executive Vice President at APCO Worldwide here in Washington, has done a lot of work dealing with Kazakhstan during that period, and she was previously ambassador to Kazakhstan in the mid-90s. She was a principal deputy assistant secretary in the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs, and Beth has a lot of experience in the Middle East over the years, having served in Lebanon, in Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, and was Lebanon desk officer. And she was also the public affairs officer for the Near East and South Asia Bureau in the early 70s. She headed the economic and commercial section in West Berlin. That's where I first got to know Beth, and that was in the early 80s. And she served as deputy principal officer in the U.S. interest section in Baghdad, Iraq, from 79 to 1980. She studied. She served in Cairo and also studied Arabic and in Beirut, in Tunis, and Cairo. And her first foreign service post in 1971-72 was in Kabul, Afghanistan. So you can see you have someone who's well steeped in the general part of the world that Kazakhstan is surrounded by. And she rose to the highest rank in the career foreign service as a career minister as well. So, and our next speaker will be
Career ambassador.
Career ambassador. Sorry, career ambassadors. Pardon me. I should have known that. Our next speaker will be Ambassador Larry Napper, and Ambassador Napper was born in San Antonio, Texas. And I mention that because Texas is an important theme here. He graduated from Texas A&M and served in the U.S. Army in the early, in the late 60s and early 70s. He went to the University of Virginia and got a master's degree in government and foreign affairs, and he entered the Foreign Service in 1974. He served in the embassy in Moscow in the mid-70s and as a political officer in Botswana. He has taken advanced training in Soviet and East European affairs at Stanford University, and then joined the Department's Office of Soviet Union Affairs in the early 1980s. He also had a congressional fellowship with someone that the Wilson Center knows fairly well, I think, Lee Hamilton. So after that, he went to the embassy in Moscow and was chief of the Foreign Affairs Unit. He was a deputy, then came back and got involved in African affairs, was as deputy director of the Department's Office of Southern African Affairs. He was charge d'affaires and deputy chief of mission in Bucharest, and this was during the time of the overthrow of Ceausescu. From August 1991 to July of 1994, he served as director of the Office of Soviet Union Affairs in the Department of State, and this came at the time that that office had to explode and cover the whole former Soviet Union, so it was quite a challenge at the time. And this involved establishing diplomatic relations with each of the 15 independent states that emerged out of that and opening embassies there. He served as U.S. ambassador to Latvia from 1995 until 1998, and then from 1999 until 2000, he was coordinator for United States assistance to Central and Eastern Europe, administering an assistance budget of some $500 to $600 million. He was sworn in as the 4th U.S. ambassador to Kazakhstan in 2001, and where he served until 2004. Right now, he is the director of the Scowcroft Institute at the Bush School at Texas A&M in Texas. So a Texan has come home to the famous institution in Texas. I note also that in 2008 you were a co-leader of the Iraq governance assessment team as well, and the members of this team included Ambassador Ryan Crocker and
no, he was the ambassador to Iraq.
Oh, at the time, and General David Petraeus as well.
The team was organized at their request and did this.
Put that together then. And last but hardly least, we have Martha Brill Alcott, who is a senior associate with the Russian and Eurasia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace here in Washington. She has specialized in problems of transitions in Central Asia and the security challenges in the Caspian region. She's followed interethnic relations in Russia and the states of the former Soviet Union for more than 25 years. She's the author of a book, Central Asia's Second Chance, and it looks at economic and political development and has been examining the changing security threats posed since 9/11 as well. As Ambassador Drisov mentioned, she's the author of really a milestone book about Kazakhstan, the Kazakhs, and several other books as well since then. She co-directs the Carnegie Moscow Center Project on Religions, Society, and Security in the former Soviet Union, and is professor emerita at Colgate University, where she taught political science from 1974 until 2002. She also served as a director of the Central Asian American Enterprise Fund for 5 years and has been a special consultant to former Secretary of State Larry Eagleburger as well. I think you can see here that we have a pretty awesome group of people on the table here. So as they start making their remarks, please think of good questions to ask them. I have asked each of the panelists here to focus on some general themes, and what these basically comprise the process of making nation-building decisions that Kazakhstan has gone through, and what they have seen in that process. The relative success of the national structures that have been set up in Kazakhstan, the management of energy resources, and both the government's and the society's response to globalization, the systems, or the people's and the system's tolerance for corruption, and its both in government and in business, and the progress of rule of law and political reform. And lastly, its success in attracting foreign direct investment and Kazakhstan's efforts to grow its own indigenous human capital as well. So those are sort of the touchstones that I've asked them to sort of address. Not everybody is going to address all 6 of those, but they're going to touch on those, I hope, at least in part. So without any more from me, let me turn it over to Jim Collins to start this off. Thank you, Jim.
Well, thank you, Bill. And since I did not serve as ambassador to Kazakhstan, I'm going to try to set some context and, in a sense, give an idea about how those of us in Washington in the very early period tried to develop a new relationship and what was in our mind as we tried to set policy. I think in those years, Kazakhstan's priority was to establish its statehood and its independence, and to begin to shape its place in a global economic system. As with many of its neighbors, in doing so, Kazakhstan's leaders were anxious to explore opportunities and direct change to support the goals they were after. U.S. policy and context, as well as our institutional links and relations with Kazakhstan, were almost as new as Kazakhstan itself. And likewise, so is our policy toward this region and its new states. What emerged in those formative years was an American policy that we built around what we heard from Kazakhstan about its own priorities, and the interests and the emerging definitions of American interests and priorities in a region new to the American agenda. Broadly speaking, those interests, I think, centered around a few key principles. First, the United States saw a shared interest in assisting Kazakhstan and the new states in Central Asia to establish themselves as independent, sovereign, stable, fully functioning members of the international community. Second, it was a key interest of the United States and our partners that the new states of Central Asia develop peacefully. It was essential that the states both avoid conflict among themselves and prevent other challenges they faced from their southern neighbors from spreading north. This objective was made all the more urgent because Tajikistan was already aflame in civil war, Afghanistan was a proximate threat, and Iran stood ready to take advantage of a new opening in Central Asia. The U.S. and our allies saw a common interest in working cooperatively to mitigate these dangers and enhance the security of each of the states in the region. Third, the United States was able to develop a consensus with President Nazarbayev in the early years about the elimination of nuclear weapons from Kazakhstan's territory. This became an objective that served to deepen and expand cooperation between our governments in a very broad range of activities, and to consolidate our relations in a particularly sensitive area. Fourth, the United States shared an understanding that Kazakhstan's energy resources would play a critical role in the nation's development. Kazakhstan wanted to see these resources develop to the advantage of Kazakhstan's own economy. The U.S. hoped to see Kazakhstan welcome American participation in this process and in the country's broader economic development. And finally, Kazakhstan began to develop its post-communist political system as the United States, in its participation, was convinced that achievement of the country's development objectives would be accomplished most successfully and fully if Kazakhstan and its neighbors adopted market economies and a political system that would provide for accountable government, protect human rights, and provide for democratic institutions. With these interests, shared to varying degrees, at the core of policy I worked with my colleagues to develop approaches that would build an enduring relationship with a key partner. We did so with an understanding that we were dealing with a very old and venerable culture, but likewise with a very young and new developing nation. My personal conception of that policy centered on the premise that America could succeed in Kazakhstan only if our government found effective programs and policies to support Kazakhstan's own aspirations. It likewise seemed to me that the most effective policies would be linked to increasing and enhancing the range of opportunities open to Kazakhstan to advance its national goals. So some key elements of the policy I was fortunate to be part of developing included these. First, support for and encouragement of Kazakhstan's membership in key international and European institutions that would create opportunities and openings to the West, opportunities that for most of the 20th century had been closed to those in Central Asia. This involved American support for Kazakhstan's taking a fully participatory role in the United Nations, in the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, in what the North Atlantic Cooperation Council, and in the Partnership for Peace, for examples. Second, working with Kazakhstan's leaders, we sought to ensure the country's peaceful development led to early cooperation on defense programs. Both bilaterally and through such programs as Partnership for Peace, American policy encouraged Kazakhstan's leadership to develop effective, reasonable security programs and supported them with sustained programs of assistance. As I noted, a major focus of our security cooperation in this early period was removal of all nuclear weapons and their infrastructure from the country. President Nazarbayev provided critical leadership working with both the U.S. and Russia in the successful effort to achieve a nuclear weapons-free Kazakhstan. His role in this achievement remains one of the major events that shaped Kazakhstan's international standing and provided it a special voice within the international nuclear community. Security assurances from the parties to the agreements that achieved this result likewise provided an important new element in Kazakhstan's security, which remain in place to this day. Shared interest in seeing Kazakhstan's successful economic development lay at the foundation of much of our most effective cooperation. We supported the involvement of U.S. and Western energy companies in the exploration and development of Kazakhstani resources, and in my time the completion of the CPC pipeline, a complex but ultimately successful effort to provide new means to bring Kazakhstani oil to the global market, was one of the more important achievements. These early policies became a central aspect of Kazakhstan's economic development and were central to the country's integration into the global marketplace. And finally, through the Freedom Support Act, and the U.S. provided funding and technical assistance for Kazakhstan's transition to a market-based economy and a non-communist political systems, programs that have contributed, often not without controversy, to a Kazakhstan today that is a fully functioning market economy, a nation governed by a working and established set of institutions of government, and an independent member of the international community. So it's certainly with a degree of satisfaction that I see Kazakhstan today as an important international partner for the United States, a partner that has contributed positively to international efforts to control nuclear proliferation and to promote the mission of key international institutions such as the OSCE. It's an impressive record over a short 2 decades that has laid a strong and durable foundation for the country's further development as a leader in its region, in Europe and in Asia. So I wish them well, and I thank you very much. And I'll give it over to my colleague, Bill Courtney.
Thank you. Bill?
Bill, thank you. Ambassador Collins really did provide some wise guidance to us in those days. Before beginning, I'd like to recognize Gobushin Bozheyeva, who was a young scientist in Kazakhstan, whom we hired as the science officer in our embassy as soon as we got there. We had a lot of science activities in those days, including the Baikonur Cosmodrome issues. Kazakhstan was surprised, of course, by its independence. It declared independence on December 16, 1991. It was the last Soviet republic to do so. At the time, President Nazarbayev was already in solid control, having been in office since 1989. He was so effective that, in fact, Mikhail Gorbachev had an interest in attracting Nazarbayev to Moscow, but Nazarbayev wisely decided not to do that. Nazarbayev, with a short break there, replaced the former General Secretary of the Communist Party, Kunayev, who was in power for about 25 years. We called on former President Kunayev just before his death in 1992 and asked him for his perspectives on things. So one of the questions we asked him was, well, what do you think of Gorbachev? He pulled back and he said, well, I won't say anything about Gorbachev, but what did he build? Well, one of the realities of Kazakhstan and other Soviet republics then was the age of the physical infrastructure. Indeed, under Kunayev and others before, a lot of building had taken place, but that building had been frozen. That was one of the immediate challenges that the government had to face, was the aging infrastructure as well as the collapse of a lot of economic relationships. There were 2 main goals at the beginning for the Kazakhstan leadership. One, as Ambassador Collins pointed out, was the independence and integrity of the country. And in that regard, they wanted to avert a secession by ethnic Slav-dominated oblasts in the north of the country to secede to Russia. At the time, though, most of the Russian oblasts bordering on Kazakhstan were trying to escape Moscow's control, so that wasn't such a major challenge. And secondly, the ethnic Kazakh leadership wanted to retain ethnic Kazakh control of the political situation. When the Soviet Union collapsed and Soviet rule in Kazakhstan, there was a non-mutual impact. Ethnic Kazakhs were left in charge of the government. Ethnic Russians and Ukrainians were left in charge of factories, which had very tight links to ministries in Moscow. But the non-mutual impact meant that the ethnic Kazakhs were very much in charge. At the same time, they had a very strong incentive to work closely with Russia because their factories could have been out of work forever if they had not developed cooperative relationships with supply chain relationships and financial arrangements with institutions in Moscow with which they had worked before. So that, among other things, led Kazakhstan to take a very moderate approach toward dealing with Russia. There were three main tools that Kazakhstan used to achieve its goals. One was tolerance. Right from the outset, the Kazakhstani leadership promoted tolerance, interethnic tolerance, and that's been a consistent feature of its policy to this day, a very wise policy. Again, at that time, there were as many ethnic Slavs in Kazakhstan, about maybe 6 million Russians, 1 million Ukrainians, as there were ethnic Kazakhs. Over time, that's changed as more Kazakhs have come in and some Slavs have left. But the emphasis on tolerance actually went back in Kazakhstan history. I met a number of minorities in Kazakhstan, including Chechens and Koreans, as I traveled around, who talked about their ancestors being dumped out of cattle cars in the Stalinist period when they were exiled to Kazakhstan, sometimes in the dead of winter, and Kazakhstanis actually took them in and helped them and kept them alive. It was one of the more generous acts, I think, in Kazakhstan history. The second tool was to carry out economic reforms to overcome poverty. That was a powerful issue. To give you an idea of the economic distortions at the time, for the first couple of months we were flying back and forth from Moscow out to Almaty. The price of an Aeroflot ticket from Moscow to Almaty was 4 rubles. And suffice it to say, ruble was worth less than $1 at that time. President Nazarbayev actually had a strong business orientation, and probably more than the other rulers of the newly independent republics learned how to work with Western business. Sometimes he learned too many things sometimes, but he learned a lot. And in the first order, he had a better climate for international energy investment, and Chevron developed the largest project in the former Soviet Union out there, in great part because President Nazarbayev had a wiser approach toward international energy investment than did certain people to the north. Kazakhstan, of course, had to overcome some severe economic distortions of other kinds, including the Virgin Lands campaign. You'll remember in the 50s, Premier Khrushchev exhorted young, enthusiastic Slavic enthusiastic to come out to the pasture lands and convert to grain-producing area, which wreaked enormous damage. At all costs, Kazakhstani leaderships wanted to avoid any confrontation with Moscow. Their policy was the opposite of the policy of the early Ukrainian leadership, for example. And a key part of that was they were landlocked. Their economic transportation links all went through Russia, whether there were rail links, roads, energy pipelines, and indeed they pursued that fairly effectively. And the third tool of their policy was to integrate with the outside world. Kazakhstan had no assurance how Russia was going to behave toward Kazakhstan in the future, and Kazakhstan knew that only Western companies could develop the energy that they had. For example, the Tengiz deposit was deep below a salt dome and had a lot of sulfur in it. The Russians just simply didn't have the technology for that. Earlier they had some Hungarian technology, but they really needed Western energy companies to do that. And so the Kazakhstanis were quite eager to integrate with the outside world. When we opened up relations, they understood the social contract with the West as well as we did. That is, denuclearize, and we'll help you bring in international energy and other investment. President Nazarbayev, again, was very business-oriented, very pragmatic, non-ideological, and that worked out. And, of course, Kazakhstan, as you know, was the first country to denuclearize. Kazakhstan, in some sense, was a giant military test range for the former Soviet Union with Semipalatinsk, Baikonur, Sari-Shagan, combat aircraft training facilities. One of our special activities was in the largest landlocked country in the world, we had the largest torpedo factory. And of course, as many of you know, the torpedoes were tested in Lake Issyk up above us in Kyrgyzstan. The Nun-Lugar program was one of the most foresighted U.S. parts of U.S. policy toward the entire former Soviet Union, but certainly in Kazakhstan. And we helped the Kazakhstanis deal with the economic and environmental detritus of the former weapons of mass destruction programs, including a huge biological weapons factory, anthrax factory, up in Stepnogorsk, which Andy Weber, who was at the Defense Department now as an assistant secretary, played the key role in carrying out. In the political development area, this was tougher for the Kazakhstanis. Ironically, when we arrived, the last Soviet-era parliament was still in power. And it turned out that was actually a pretty good parliament. There were figures who had legitimacy throughout Kazakhstan, throughout various parts of Kazakhstani society. And they were proud of their role. And then, as time went on, President Nazarbayev was able to subdue parliament, get new parliaments in, and no parliament has been as free as the last Soviet parliament in Kazakhstan. In the media, again, ironically, I went to visit the editor of Kazakhstan Pravda, having lived in Moscow, where we saw Pravda at a different context. It turned out the editor of Kazakhstan Pravda was actually a free thinker himself. Eventually was replaced, but he was a free thinker. And even to a greater extent, there was an independent newspaper called Caravan, which was quite free and quite critical of the government. It had an accident, a $1 million stock of newspaper print was burned up in a mysterious fire at that point, I think in 1994, 1995. And I went out to visit the fire, and the government was not so happy about that. But media, of course, have not done well since then. We made good efforts with International Republican Institute, International Foundation for Electoral Systems, and other democracy-building NGOs. But the reality was, in Kazakhstan, there was just too little civil society, and the government had too much power, and so it was difficult and really impossible to sustain a lot of those activities. While I was there, the Kazakhstanis began talking about moving the capital from Almaty up to Astana, which was the center of Khrushchev's social engineering experiment with the Virgin Lands campaign. And the apparent purpose was to move the capital up, to encourage more Kazakhs to move up there, and to discourage ethnic Russian oblasts in the north from seceding to Russia, and discourage Russia from trying to move down there. We encouraged the notion among various Kazakhstanis that democratic development would be another way to assure that the country would remain loyal, and ethnic Slavs would participate in the political process on an equal basis. If that happened, that would be a much lower cost way of holding the country together. But that was not chosen, and a lot of money was spent on capital that has some question. And finally, I would note toward the end of my time there, international Russian organized crime group called Nordex sought to insert itself in Kazakhstan and sought to insert itself via international companies in Kazakhstan. So for the last part of the time I was there, we had a significant effort underway to protect American investors from the tentacles of the Nordex crime group. All in all, I'd have to say, Kazakhstan has developed very successfully, given the context, as Ambassador Collins pointed out, and especially if one compares Kazakhstan to a neighbor just to the south. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. That was most interesting. Our next presentation will be by Ambassador Beth Jones.
Thank you very much. I was very fortunate when I arrived in Kazakhstan that Bill Courtney had already done all of the arms control work because I didn't know how to do any of it. And my period of time in Kazakhstan was focused on the basic principles that Jim Collins had established at the beginning of our relationship with this part of the world, and that Bill Courtney and his embassy started and got going. I think of them in four categories, all of them mentioned by Bill. And each of them is progressing even to this day. I was very fortunate, of course, to have had several incarnations with Kazakhstan, both as ambassador, as director for Caspian Energy Diplomacy in the late 90s, and then again as assistant secretary for Europe and Eurasia from 2001 to 2005. So I was able to go in and work with my Kazakhstani colleagues on a variety of these issues. On the 4 areas, let's start with the economic reform, economic development part of it. One of the things that's overwhelmingly obvious in Kazakhstan when you get there is the very, very high level of education of the vast majority of people. I mean, it's 99% literacy rate, and it's not just literacy, it's a very high level of education, so that all of the training programs, all of the seminars, all of the work that was outlined by the policies established by Jim Collins and carried out, begun by the people working with Bill, were very short-term programs. They didn't require a long sort of literacy program in order to get people up to speed on health issues or on banking issues or on environmental issues. It was simply some training that brought very well-educated Kazakhstanis, people who understood their sectors very well, up to date on how these kinds of issues are thought about in other international institutions or in international institutions in the societies in which Kazakhstan and people in Kazakhstan wanted to be connected. I'd also like to point out the very important role that Western energy companies played, particularly American, in this case American energy companies played, in one of the areas that is still a problem in Kazakhstan, a big problem in Kazakhstan, and that is corruption. And that comes from when they first got there, explained to their Kazakhstani colleagues the importance of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and how much they were required to adhere to the principles and practices that were required by the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which meant that for all of the period I was there and all the periods that I worked later with Kazakhstan, there were very, very few instances of American companies being suborned for corruption, or being Kazakhstani government officials trying to get to American companies to get them to pay under the table. Now, there were a few instances. We know all about them. These various people have gone to jail over them. But I mention this because it was quite different from a lot of the countries in which I served previously in South Asia and the Middle East, where offers of money for bids were quite normal. The other thing that I think is very important to mention in this context is the difference between the way the United States behaved in Kazakhstan and the way the only other superpower that Kazakhstanis knew had behaved, i.e. the Russians. As far as the Kazakhstanis were concerned, they thought the United States was the other superpower. It was the other organization, it was the other country that they had always heard about, didn't know very much about at all. They got to know a little bit more, of course, thanks to Jim Collins and Bill Courtney and their teams. But particularly the assistance directors, the people who understood about how to, what kinds of programs and institutions might work best in a place like Kazakhstan, came in and having learned that the Kazakhstanis were quite capable of deciding their own fate because of the cooperative programs that were developed thanks to on the nuclear programs. The American officials came in, the American economic development specialists, and said to President Nazarbayev and to people under him, there are a variety of banking systems that you can pick. There are a variety of tax systems that you can pick. These are the attributes of each one. If you pick this financial system that leads to this kind of a banking system and this kind of a stock exchange and this kind of a tax system, if you pick this one, it leads off in this other direction. You decide which one of these models you would prefer for your own country. And this set the American experts quite apart from the only other superpower experts that the Kazakhstanis that we worked with knew, which meant that we developed, our experts developed very quickly a great sense of trust between the people, between themselves and the people they were working with. But what that meant was it was a tremendous responsibility for us, for the other Americans who were there, to be sure that when we were asked for advice, which we were asked increasingly in all kinds of sectors, whether education or health, economics, whatever it was, that the advice we were giving them was fair, that it was accurate, that it wasn't just American, wasn't just an American system, but that it was a system that could be that made sense for Kazakhstan, and that Kazakhstanis could choose among if it was a pension system or whatever it was. So that the pension system was picked, for instance, was one that was very well known in Chile. The other aspect of the work that we did in Kazakhstan was, at that time, worked on the very strong sense of independence of Kazakhstan from Russia, from the other countries in the region, and the very strong sense that Kazakhstan wanted to put itself forward and really work at engaging with other institutions. So we had a very, very active Partnership for Peace set of programs. That was I was there during the period of the Kazakhstan Battalion, the Central Asia Battalion. It didn't last very long for a variety of reasons, but nevertheless, it was a very good initial effort at how to work cooperatively with the neighbors in an international institution like Partnership for Peace, part of NATO. And at the time, we were extremely careful every time we proposed an exercise or any kind of a seminar to be sure that our Russian colleagues were invited, who after all were members of Partnership for Peace, but also to explain it to our Chinese colleagues, to invite them to the briefings, to invite them to participate and review the exercises, so that to achieve as much transparency as possible and therefore reduce the anxiety about what it was that the United States was trying to do in these places. At the time, however, although Bill's experience was that Kazakhstan was very concerned about its relationship with Russia, by the time I got there, just a couple of years later, Kazakhstan, in my view, was much more relaxed about its relationship with Russia. It had figured out the areas that it wanted to agree on, that it felt it had the stature to agree on with Russia. It picked its fights very, very carefully, but it was extremely worried about China. And the then foreign minister, who worked very closely with Ambassador Idrisov, was a China hand, and he set out to negotiate with the Chinese to make agreements on every single tiny part of a kilometer of the border to assure that there was not a single part of the Kazakhstan-China border that China could ever say was in dispute or hadn't quite been negotiated. So to make it, what I always envision it in my mind as a glass wall between China and Kazakhstan that no Chinese could ever get their grip on and in any way and threaten Kazakhstan in ways that Kazakhstan wasn't prepared to, didn't want to have to deal with. On social issues, we had a lot of cooperation on health reform, health issues, a tremendous number of specialists in Kazakhstan who completely understood, and were very, very well educated in medical matters, and completely understood the importance of the transformation from a command economy in health to a patient-focused economy in health. That was a very positive development. The area in which we spent a tremendous amount of time working also, of course, was in political reform, development of political parties. It was still difficult, as Ambassador Courtney has mentioned, and it's still an area that I think requires some focus. And I'd like to put it this way, in closing. I mentioned already how impressed everybody was with the level of education of the Kazakhstani people. There was a dip, I think, in the focus on education that's come back up again. I don't think there's still a tremendous amount of focus on the importance of education. But this also means that the people of Kazakhstan know a lot, and they know a lot about what they want for their own futures. They know a lot about, and they're more comfortable in deciding and feeling that they're capable of deciding their own futures. President Nazarbayev has spent a lot of time and put a lot of the country's treasure into the education of his people, into assuring that they have jobs, into assuring that they are well connected with Western and other international institutions. He doesn't have the courage of his convictions, though, in trusting his people to make good political choices. The opposition leaders of Kazakhstan are all virtually all are his proteges. They're all people who share his same dreams, his same goals for Kazakhstan. They are all people who, if they were allowed to have a little bit more say in the political life of the country, would lead the country in the same direction that he has. My fear is that by making it more difficult for the political will of the people to be expressed through more political parties, through media, that the younger generation, the generation that didn't grow up with the shared concept that President Nazarbayev has with some of the opposition leaders, will become frustrated and will be turned to be much more attracted by radicalized parties in the country. And that's something that I think is something I worry about. It's something that I think the leaders of Kazakhstan should worry about. But what they shouldn't worry about is the ability of their countrymen to make good political choices now before it's too late.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Beth. And I want to thank our panelists so far for your time discipline that you've been showing. I really appreciate that. We still have two more speakers. Ambassador Napper, you're on next. Thank you very much.
Bill, thank you very much. I want to touch on three issues, I think, which hopefully answer Bill's request for some thoughts on the process and the decisions that Kazakhstan has taken with regard to integration to the modern world, and which continue to be ongoing, that require ongoing decision making today. The first is the post 9/11 effort to counter terrorism and to stabilize Afghanistan and the region. I arrived in Kazakhstan 1 week before 9/11, and I will never forget the outpouring of support from the government of Kazakhstan and the people of Kazakhstan after the tragedy of 9/11. In an unprecedented gesture, President Nazarbayev immediately visited the U.S. Embassy, received my credentials on a very expedited basis, and promised complete solidarity with the U.S. in its efforts to prevent future attacks. As my friend Yerlan Idrisov has already alluded to, we worked very closely, he and I. He was then minister and I was newly arrived ambassador, to work out some concrete arrangements for overflights and other support to U.S. operations. We did establish the famous or infamous confidential dedicated telephone link between I wonder if it's still there, Yerlan. Maybe, I don't know. One reason for this is because our coordination was complicated by the fact the embassy was still in Almaty and the government in Astana. But Kazakhstan delivered in those days on everything the U.S. asked for, and Yerlan, I appreciate very much your personal role in that and others in those trying days. And later, at an equally different time, actually provided a contingent of military engineers to the coalition effort in Iraq. A very difficult decision to take. Now, as the U.S. ramps up its efforts in Afghanistan, Kazakhstan is again critical to those efforts as an absolutely essential partner in the Northern Distribution Network, which is critical to the logistical support of the NATO effort in Afghanistan. No matter which of the routes within the Northern Distribution Network that you look at, a simple look at the map reveals that all of them require a vital participation by Kazakhstan. This reality was underscored when President Obama and President Nazarbayev met in Washington on April 11th. And it's important to realize that Kazakhstan has not undertaken these efforts as a favor to the United States, but as a far-sighted and statesmanlike calculation of Kazakhstan's interests. Living as it does in a tough geopolitical neighborhood, Kazakhstan has an interest in a strategic relationship with the U.S. and with NATO. Kazakhstan has a vital interest in preventing a Taliban resurgence in Afghanistan that would risk a return to the pre-9/11 threat of instability from Afghanistan boiling back into Central Asia and over Kazakhstan's borders. And looking at the longer term, Kazakhstan has some important and even vital economic interests at stake. NATO and the U.S. are already procuring supplies from Kazakh companies, and the Northern Distribution Network has revived the dream of the of a new Silk Road linking Kazakhstan and Central Asia to the world. So the seeds sown in those early 9/11 days are now taking root and growing into ever more active cooperation to stabilize Afghanistan and to build the future of Central Asia. And obviously this process is going to be an overriding priority in the days ahead. On a second issue, that is the integration of Kazakhstan into the global economy. During my time, I was convinced that the single most important step that could be taken by Kazakhstan to advance its integration into the global economy was early accession to the World Trade Organization. That remains true today, and it remains an area which still needs work. A good place to start took place on my watch when in March 2002, the U.S. recognized Kazakhstan as a market economy under U.S. trade law. Anybody who's a U.S. ambassador really realizes you have some good days and bad days and in between days. Well, this was a good day. The day that the then Secretary of Commerce, Don Evans, called the President to tell him the good news of that designation. But alas, that happy news did not lead in itself to a breakthrough into Kazakhstan's WTO accession or to the repeal of the 1974 Jackson-Vanik legislation as it applies to Kazakhstan's trade relations with the United States. The WTO accession process for Kazakhstan began, believe it or not, 1996. Bill, was that on your?
Mine.
Yours.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which still continues, and it still continues as the bilateral working, the multilateral working party in Geneva and the bilateral negotiations with key trading partners, frankly, continue to drag on. President Nazarbayev called for acceleration of this process in January at his annual speech to the nation, and I noted that Deputy Prime Minister Zhukev recently told a business group that he hoped to reach agreement with Kazakhstan's major trading partners by the end of the year. I hope that's true, because at their April 11th meeting in Washington, President Obama, I'm sorry, let me put it this way. When they met in April, President Obama and Nazarbayev committed to redouble the efforts. So it's a joint commitment to achieve that breakthrough. But there does need to be a sense of urgency here, in part because there's a renewed push by the U.S. and Russia to complete Russia's WTO accession. In the June 24th Hamburger Summit, Presidents Obama and Medvedev set the goal of September 30th to wind up the process of working out the issues between the United States on Russia and Russia on its accession. Now, that timetable may be wildly optimistic, and probably is, but Kazakhstan needs to carefully consider the implications of lagging behind Russia's accession. I used to try, mostly unsuccessfully, to convince my Kazakhstan counterparts that Kazakhstan need not wait on Russia to exceed the WTO. But in any event, it seems clear that Kazakhstan's interest would not be served by being left behind a Russian entry into the WTO. So there does need to be a sense of urgency on the part of Kazakhstan to do its homework, to meet the WTO standards, including bringing its domestic legislation into compliance with WTO standards. Now, the U.S. side has homework also to do. And I personally believe that the Obama administration should make a serious effort to persuade Congress to graduate Kazakhstan from the purview of Jackson-Vanik and to approve permanent normal trade relations, PNTR, for Kazakhstan. So that both sides should realize that further delay in this process serves nobody's interests, and simply we should move forward. Finally, I want to say a word about Kazakhstan and the OSCE presidency. At least as far as I know, the possibility of Kazakhstan serving in the capacity of OSCE president emerged during my ambassadorship. I'm not aware that it came up sooner than that, and I could be wrong. No. As then Foreign Minister, Tokayev made the idea one of his top priorities. Now, frankly, at the outset, nobody, or few observers, gave Kazakhstan much of a chance to become the first of the former Soviet states to serve as the OSCE president. But through patient, persistent diplomacy, Kazakhstan lined up the member countries one at a time until a favorable consensus began to emerge. And by the way, this is a textbook case of how a single small country, not not so small. But I mean, one of 35 countries. One of 35 countries can, as it were, with a careful, program of diplomacy, sort of bend an international organization to its will on an issue. Now, as unlikely as it might have seemed in 2004, Kazakhstan is now halfway through its year as the OSCE president. And frankly, some of the serious concerns raised in 2004 about Kazakhstan's own record of fulfillment of OSCE requirements remain unresolved. And also, recent events in Kyrgyzstan have given rise to new concerns about whether the OSCE, under Kazakhstan's or any other country's presidency, is really up to the current challenges the organization faces in promoting peace and stability and respect for fundamental human rights in the former Soviet space. During my tenure in Kazakhstan, and Yerlan knows this, there were certainly instances in which my counterparts in the government of Kazakhstan and I had some fairly sharp differences on some of these issues. But we were always able to maintain a civil and productive dialogue even when we disagreed. So it does remain my hope that Kazakhstan's OSCE presidency will provide a fresh and lasting impetus toward democracy and the rule of law and respect for human rights that will unlock the full potential of the great people of Kazakhstan and thus truly validate the premise of this conference, which is that Kazakhstan is poised to take its rightful place in the modern world.
Thank you very much, Larry. At this point, I want you to sort of think about a transition here. You've been listening to 4 ambassadors who've had official U.S. government roles and experiences looking at Kazakhstan. Now we're going to shift, and I've asked Martha Olcott to come as a sort of non-official sort of view, a person who's been looking at Kazakhstan, visiting Kazakhstan, knowing the country during the full period and beyond and earlier, as a matter of fact. So I think it'd be appropriate now to sort of get her views on what she's just heard from these official views, as well as adding her perspectives into this mix. Martha?
How do I get this on?
I don't think you need to.
It's on.
It's already on, okay. I feel like after Ambassador Idrissov's introduction, I feel like I should start with the Scythians or something. But it's really my daughter who's the archaeologist, and I have one who's a paleontologist too, so maybe I'm really equipped for this. I want to take Bill's invitation, and more than comment, I think I want to offer my perspectives and try not to overlap the others. Unlike everybody else on the panel, I've not been a U.S. government official, and I've had the privilege to know all of these ambassadors. I know some as ambassadors some way before, some in their other capacities, and Jim I even know as a junior Foreign Service officer when in the dark ages we first met in Moscow in the early 70s. My role has really been very different as a student, a scholar, and analyst, and supposedly somebody who, although I have my own biases, has tried to be impartial. I've been a critic both of U.S. policy towards Kazakhstan and some of Kazakhstan's policies towards their own country. And I've also, especially since joining Carnegie a decade or so ago, I've tried to sensitize both sides as to what the other has been thinking. And I think that is what I see as having been my most valuable role in the last decade. As the U.S. has grappled to understand what is Kazakhstan in Central Asia, as well as how to understand and formulate what our security priorities or strategic priorities should be for the region. And as Kazakhstan has learned to try to get Washington, and there's been a series of really very, very talented ambassadors here from Kazakhstan, as Kazakhstan has tried to learn to get has sought to try to sensitize Washington to the fact that the world looks different from Almaty originally in Astana than it looks from here in D.C., and so this is kind of my comments really are trying to bridge this gap. I think that the U.S., and I'm going to start with the U.S.-Kazakh relationship, and I'm going to end with it, and I'm going to talk some about Kazakh priorities in the middle and try to touch on some of the things that Bill asked of us and reiterate a few of the points that were made before. The Kazakh-U.S. relationship has been a work in progress. It's evolved. Kazakhstan has become a much more articulate partner in the relationship over the time that it's occurred. Sometimes the U.S. has been slow to pick this up. Other times they've been much faster to pick it up. And I think there is an enormous opportunity for the relationship to deepen, and as I say, I'm going to come back and talk about limitations on this at the end, especially as a new generation raised largely under the conditions of independence comes into the forefront of Kazakhstan's life. We already see that happening in Kazakhstan. This new generation, already partially raised under independence, is now beginning to dominate in business, culture, and is being introduced in the country's political life. And it's begun a process which President Nazarbayev recognizes, which is going to take at least another half generation for this transition to be complete. But when those of us who survive into this period meet again in 10 or 15 years or celebrate the 25th anniversary or 35th anniversary of independence of Kazakhstan, it will already have been completed. Nonetheless, the current leadership in Kazakhstan, and especially President Nazarbayev, has sought to define what Kazakhstan's statehood is, could, and should mean, and for that I think he really, he's become a sort of a living national founding figure who will be responsible for these definitions, for setting the course that the country has taken, and a course which we can criticize part of it, but really is. Kazakhstan stands now in a place where none of us 20 years ago ever anticipated it would stand. So, I think that's a really important thing to put out on the table to begin with. I think that Kazakhstan, I have my pages out of order, I apologize. First, I want to talk about sort of what is Kazakh nationhood and what has it become, one of the themes that no one else has really touched on yet. I think President Nazarbayev has really worked very self-consciously to define modern Kazakh nationhood, modern Kazakhstani nationhood, with Kazakhstan as a multinational country based on respect for, as a multinational country that is simultaneously based on respect for national diversity, for the 130 nations and peoples that live in Kazakhstan, but also simultaneously serves as the homeland of the Kazakhs. And as we've talked about, as some of the ambassadors have talked about, this isn't an easy trick to balance these two sets of interests. And I think President Nazarbayev and the Kazakh government in general has, as we've heard, has had an evolving understanding of Kazakhstan's economic priorities and how to achieve them. He really has moved enormously, as Jim Collins said, in the introduction of a market economy and encouraging foreign direct investment, and maintaining this simultaneously with a special relationship with Russia. The current customs union, whether it survives and thrives, still goes back to a very early idea of Nazarbayev in 1994 that there should be a Eurasian Union. The key for President Nazarbayev is that it always has to be a union of equals that recognizes the different economic potential and current strength of the countries, but in which everybody has an equal voice, and that will be the key of whether this succeeds or fails. And as I say, and the challenge is we were asked to talk about corruption, which everybody skirted around, but the challenge has been to introduce a market economy in a country in which there was no private property at all in 1990, when no one had any money. And so while elites and citizens alike were trying to balance the introduction of private property with personal and national needs, and that has really led to a corruption problem that everybody has talked about, and has created periodic crises, as we've talked about, in which the government of Kazakhstan has taken some important steps towards subscribing to international transparency initiatives and to introducing rule of law in business transactions, but remains something that Kazakh businessmen and readers of newspapers on any continent periodically encounter. So there's clearly work to still be done, which the Kazakhs themselves recognize. There's also, and I don't think this can be linked to corruption and the discussion of corruption, there's an evolving understanding of how Kazakhstan should realize its national wealth and what is national property and what is private property. And the fact that Kazakhstan has had a corruption problem in some of the elite has magnified the importance of this discussion of what is national property, because people feel like ordinary citizens feel if there isn't national property and if national wealth isn't protected, and that affects foreign investment for sure, and evolving terms on foreign investment, then they feel that they're going to be shortchanged in the wealth, and that becomes a political issue. And let me talk quickly, I'm going to run out of time, about political evolution. As everybody has said, political reform has gone more slowly than economic reform. Kazakhstan has, and I think this is really important, and this echoes a point that Beth made, or with the growth of human development, with the attention to human development, more than anybody else in Central Asia and in most of post-Soviet space, Kazakhstan has paid attention to human development issues. And even though education, there is real unevenness in the protection of the social welfare net, the government has done more than anybody that I can think about to put this on sustainable market conditions and to address these issues. I think the Bolshak program is the most significant development in the human dimension anywhere in post-Soviet space. And the challenge for Kazakhstan is going to be to keep these people, to keep this next generation, and to use them in a way that doesn't frustrate them, to bring them, and which the government recognizes by virtue of having requirements on how many Bolshak people have to be in what level and what ministries. But I think this is going to be the pressure for political reform, and if the voice of these people isn't heard, then I think Kazakhstan is going to enter into a period where the kind of issues that Beth talked about, which I certainly agree with everything she said about that. I think one of the challenges, and this is something that I worry about, which is giving voice to what she said in a different way, is that there has been increased social differentiation in Kazakhstan, and that differentiation in parts of the country is much more profound than it was in the Soviet period. And that, I think, is fueling a rise of Kazakh nationalism that I wouldn't call extremism, but is not nationalism that necessarily has the spirit of the secular values and the tolerance that's implicit in what the official conversations on nationalism are, and the increased linkage of Kazakh nationalism with increased religiosity and the tendency for the first time to introduce more extreme forms of Islam than had ever been present there. This, I fear, will lead to not just a change of the masses, but a fear of the masses, and that as this transition goes forward, generational transition, may lead even the kinds of reformers that we've all talked about to be more cautious about democratic reform. And that, I personally think, would be denying Kazakhstan the potential to grow economically, to grow politically at the rate that it's growing economically. Let me conclude just by saying something about foreign relations. Let me go back for my concluding remark to talk about U.S.-Kazakh relations. I do think that while Kazakhstan and the U.S. seem likely to continue to deepen their relationship, I also predict that the gaps, the frustrations that we see on both sides of the table are likely to continue in one form or another. I mean, that Kazakhstan has clearly emerged as a real country or a normal country. It's a place where most people are proud of their citizenship, even if they have a list of complaints. We all have lists of complaints about our citizenship. And while it is evolving its identity in ways that the U.S. doesn't always understand, or that international actors who have remote contact or even lots of contact but represent different, have a different agenda, don't always understand. And I think that relations with Russia and China, and these really are my final points, relations with Russia and China will continue to have a priority in Kazakhstan, a priority that doesn't change if the U.S. hits a reset button or not. And I think the challenge of China for Kazakhstan, China is the large new kid on the block, and Kazakhstan is going to have to work out its identity vis-a-vis China in very important ways. And Kazakhstan is seeking to create a regional role, and this is my last 2 points, that I'm not sure that Kazakhstan will be able to achieve this regional role if it sets forth an identity for itself that's fully consistent with U.S. values. Kazakhstan has to be a regional leader. If Kazakhstan is going to be a regional leader, it has to reflect the values of the region. And this is my very final point. And I hope that the U.S. side, we've talked about what's changing on the Kazakh side, I hope that the U.S. side of the table will also begin to take stock of its priorities vis-a-vis other states, especially as we enter a post-intervention period when the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan finally draw to a close. I think that would be a real opportunity for us to ask the question, how do we wish to lead in advancing the U.S. visions, U.S. global visions, and whether there can be more dialogue with our partners in the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martha. That was terrific. I think we're now at a point where we have to make a decision. I had wanted to preserve about 5 or 10 minutes or so for the panelists to respond to anything each of them said, but I want to give time to the audience for questions and answers. We've got about 30 minutes now before the reception is supposed to start. Could I ask the panelists if in the course of answering questions you might be able to respond to things that others have said, and so we could go right now straight away and take questions from the floor here. Yes, Dana Marshall? Do we have a microphone? Please identify yourself and your affiliation.
Thank you. I'm Dana Marshall with Dewey and LaBeouf. Thanks very much, Bill, and it's very nice to see this panel. So many old friends of long standing, excuse me.
We've established our ages.
My question is one that has been sort of discussed by a number of you, but not explicitly. The subject of this conference is Kazakhstan in the modern world. People are talking about the strong emphasis on education in the country, the big priority that the President and others give to funding students. There is an emphasis as well, the discussion of the WTO and the conferring of PNTR, the investment side. But what's really needed to make all of that work is the ability of the country to diversify its economy, a priority which certainly Kazakhstan has. I know the United States over a long period of time has shared that. The question I have for the panel is, what are your own sense of prospects? What sectors? Why hasn't it happened enough? After all, if you're not exporting a wide range of goods, having the WTO and the other benefits that it confers may not be as important. You may not be able to employ people that you educate. You need that diversification for many reasons. What are the prospects? What can be done to make it happen faster?
Anyone particularly want to take that? Well,
Larry, you're probably
Larry Napper, you raised WTO.
Yes, I did. I raised WTO, and obviously there is a critical link here, and I think everyone on this panel would agree that this needs to be a priority. The reliance on hydrocarbons is problematic for Kazakhstan for a number of reasons. One is that it's a market that, I mean, all of us on this panel can remember days when oil was $10 a barrel, and we may never go back there again. But I know Irulan remembers this. 1998, it was a terrible time, and one can never be sure what's going to happen in that regard. The second is the problem of export, of trying to find ways to get that. Now that's a lot better now, thanks to the efforts that Beth and others have made in terms of, and people in the government of Kazakhstan as well, to diversify their export of routes and opportunities for export of hydrocarbons. But it's still a problematic dependence. The search for a silver bullet to ameliorate that dependence on hydrocarbon exports has been going on for a long time, and I suspect that the reason why it hasn't worked is because there isn't one. There isn't one single thing. There isn't a single bullet that you can fire. There's not a single commodity. There's not a single policy that you can put into place that's going to fix this. It will require a very patient and persistent process of looking for commodities and finished products that Kazakhstan can export, and looking for appropriate buyers and sellers on both sides. So I wish I could identify, certainly there are agricultural products, for instance, that Kazakhstan does produce, the wheat in the northern oblasts in the country. There are the beginnings of some manufactured products, I think, that have some promise. But I do think that even if this process of diversification is nascent and is at its outset, that it would be to the real benefit of Kazakhstan's producers, even if some of them don't think so in the near term, to have Kazakhstan participate in the global economy on the basis of a rules-based system such as the WTO, rather than being subject to the vagaries of the market as it exists outside those rules-based standards. So I don't know what others would like to add to that, but that's my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. I think we have two people who would like to add. Bill Courtney, please.
Let me give a different answer, a Chicago school answer. The issue is not diversifying the economy. The issue is improving the investment climate across the board, and that is with crime, corruption, reducing impediments to capital flows, reducing impediments to starting businesses and operating them. The goal for a country should be to maximize economic rent, and the country can figure out how to distribute the economic rent. But this is an argument that is going on now in Moscow with the so-called modernization debate. The challenge is not really to diversify. The challenge is to improve the investment climate, and a long way needs to go before that can occur.
Beth, did you want to
It's a very
finish?
quick point. I think part of the answer, too, is regionalization, reducing the barriers between the countries in the region so that goods can flow back and forth more easily for food being grown in the Fergana Valley or in Uzbekistan to be manufactured in finished products and vice versa. But so long as that there are local barriers as high as they are, the kind of diversification that you're talking about and the kind of removal of investment impediments that Bill has talked about will be difficult.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to keep in mind. And the regionalization will also call forth indigenous investors in the area as well, too, and who may want to call in on foreign partners. Martha, you had something to add?
Yeah, I agree with everything, especially with everything's been said, especially what Beth said. But I also think in the original policies towards diversification, there was a certain naivety about how much diversity Kazakhstan could have and in what sectors. And as the policies move forward, as they get reworked, there is a narrowing down on the part of the government. I also think Kazakhstan can meet some of its I think we have to separate out the needs. The need is the sustainable economy, which requires the things that Bill Courtney was talking about. But also, on the other hand, it's a population of 16 million people, good education and even economic specialization, even in not hydrocarbon export, but even in the service industries, which is one of the areas that Kazakhstan's moving. You can employ an awful lot of people if they're well trained enough to work in the areas of the export market. So a lot of it goes back to an education question. But one of the big things has been, and it's only recently beginning to emerge, that the Kazakhs have to set priorities as well about what seems realistic.
I wanted to say that Ambassador Drisov has kindly agreed to answer questions as well. So if you have any questions you want to direct to him, he's here in the front row, and we can get a mic to him very easily. So the question in the back, lady in the very back corner of the room there.
I'm Nalva Imamova from the Voice of America. How would you, and my question is to everybody, including Ambassador Idrisov, how would you assess the Kazakhstan's response to the crisis in Kyrgyzstan, both as a neighbor, as an emerging regional leader, and more importantly, as the current chairman of the OSCE? Thank you.
Okay, who would like to start on that one? I think there's a...
I'll say one.
You going to say anything?
Yeah,
All right.
why don't I, let me give it a try. I thought that President Nazarbayev, as the chairman in office of the OSCE, played a very positive role, a very necessary role in the early days after Rosa Utembayeva came in and Bakiyev was still in the country, of helping to negotiate the removal or the departure of former President Bakiyev. I thought that was a very appropriate role and one that stood Kazakhstan in good stead and the OSCE in good stead. I would have liked to have seen more OSCE involvement in Kyrgyzstan. That said, I don't know enough about what's going on there. Maybe there is considerable behind-the-scenes activity by Kazakhstan as the OSCE chairman in office. But it is a role that the OSCE could and should play, particularly since it's so close by and knows the issues as well as it does.
Ambassador Drisov, would you like to
Maybe you can
catch that punt?
Well, thank you very much. I'll try to sum up what the U.S. ambassadors are saying, right, on this thing. Actually, to answer your question, we will need another session like this. In a nutshell, as a neighbor and as the chair of OEC, we try to hit a number of tracks. Humanitarian assistance is important. Support for keeping the stability in the country is important. A good eye on calming down the interethnic clashes is very important. So you have a multiplicity of tasks in Kyrgyzstan. On the other hand, Kyrgyz situation very clearly show to everyone that institutions like OEC are very much inefficient. So we have a number of challenges within Kyrgyzstan and outside Kyrgyzstan. So we have a very difficult task to put this together and try to address the situation in a very efficient, collective way. I think that we are succeeding. We were united on supporting the referendum in Kyrgyzstan. We were united to quickly react, to try to quickly react to the ethnic outburst in the south of Kyrgyzstan. I think we are united in trying to offer OSCE an opportunity to re-emerge as an efficient institution with a rapid response capacity. But all of this is a work in progress and many things remain to be seen. There are lots of challenges. The forthcoming elections in Kyrgyzstan in October is a challenge. The forthcoming economic hardships which we expect in the winter is a challenge. Therefore, Kazakhstan most lately came up with another big initiative which is addressed, which it comes out both bilaterally and as the chair of OEC. On the 5th of July, Nazarbayev met with Rosa Otunbayeva and offered to build up quickly a senior working level group of technocrats. We already established this group on our part, headed by First Deputy Prime Minister, having 16 members from the entire economic bloc of the economy. The Kyrgyz team is coming tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. We sit down together. We work a comprehensive plan of economic rehabilitation of Kyrgyzstan, which will embrace everything. And we will figure out what are the costs, what are the challenges, what are the weak points of that program, and we will employ our resources and we will try to make sure that international resources are employed in the most efficient way. So this is the most challenging task and the time of opportunity both for the neighbors, first of all for the Kyrgyz themselves and the neighbors and the international community.
Thank you. Yes, Anders.
Thank you, Anders Åslund, the Peterson Institute. I would like to take the opportunity to ask Ambassador Drisov about this conclusion of a customs union a week ago between Presidents Nazarbayev, Medvedev and Lukashenko. What does it mean to the Kazakh customs tariff? Have they gone up now, or is Kazakhstan maintaining its old import tariffs? And what does this mean to the WTO accession? Will this complicate the WTO accession? Russian Minister Khristenko said that this means that the temporary higher Russian import tariffs that were introduced in the beginning of 2009 will now last until 2012. So what does all this mean to Kazakhstan? Thank you.
I better stand here. A good exercise, anyway. Thank you. Again, a very big topic. Partly it was touched when my colleagues were addressing the WTO issue. Again, in a nutshell, customs union is a byproduct of the dragging WTO negotiations, first of all. They both started together, negotiations for the customs union and negotiations for the WTO. They started together in mid-90s. And the contributing factors for the greater speed of the customs union was, of course, the low speed of the WTO and the global crisis. Kazakhstan is a landlocked economy. Kazakhstan is an energy-dependent economy. Kazakhstan is not having a full access to major markets. EU, for example, US markets are not big markets for Kazakhstan. And of course, Kazakhstan has to make sure that the crisis devastates the potential of the economy to dangerous extents. What Kazakhstan gets in return from the customs union? Russia, by adding Kazakhstan, Russia, and Belarus onto the customs union, Kazakhstan expanded its market to a population of almost 200 million people. Kazakhstan's economy is only a market of 16 million people. By entering the customs union, we increased the market to 200 million people with the GDP potential of about $2 trillion US dollars. Secondly, Kazakhstan is a landlocked country, the largest landlocked country in the world. We have, by customs union, we helped ourselves to unify the transit tariffs. The cost considerations in anything Kazakhstan is doing is one of the biggest considerations. All the business partners of Kazakhstan know this very well. Therefore, addressing the landlockedness of Kazakhstan was the second driving force behind the customs union. Thirdly, Kazakhstan was one of the fastest growing or most active reformers. If you take the doing business ranking or rating by the World Bank, you will see that Kazakhstan made huge strides. We are now at the 62 rate, higher than Luxembourg. To give you in perspective, Russia's rating is 140, and Ukraine rating, for example, is 142. So you will see the difference. Therefore, as the place to do business, as Bill said, investment climate is an important thing. We understand this, and they're inseparable from each other, diversification and improvement of the investment climate. And we are doing this, and this rating clearly shows that we are quite successful. Therefore, in comparative terms, as a member of the customs union, we are much more attractive territory for foreign businesses to come. So this would be, in a nutshell, my answer. We heard certain kind of misgivings here in Washington a year ago when the customs union was announced. I think that we are through that period. We have a nice and informed dialogue. Our WTO accession is still a priority. We have reinvigorated our efforts. As Larry Napper said, our presence in April reconfirmed that they are redoubling efforts on WTO accession. We have an ongoing active negotiation process. We have the first Deputy Prime Minister coming, hopefully in September, to have political dialogue on that. So it's not a matter of coming first or second, but we understand all the challenges which come with that. So customs union and WTO were the priorities for Kazakhstan because Kazakhstan desperately needs markets. Kazakhstan desperately needs encouragements for its successful economic growth and development. Therefore, we know what customs union brings to us, and we know what WTO will bring to us. Therefore, we are pursuing that purpose vehemently.
Thank you.
And I remain here.
Yes, please, you do. Yes, gentleman on the aisle there in red tie.
My name is Albert Isley. I'm the founding editor and now editor-at-large of the Hill newspaper. I also was a public policy scholar here in 2007. I want to congratulate the panel and the Woodrow Wilson Center and the Kennan Institute for a very thoughtful and thought-provoking and informative presentation. I want to follow up. I want to ask two questions, actually three things that Ambassador Jones mentioned. But first of all, I would say that I think the biggest problem in U.S.-Kazakhstan relations is that most Americans know very little about Kazakhstan, and I would dare say most members of Congress. And I was among those people until first week of April when I took a group of American journalists to Kazakhstan at the invitation of Ambassador and the Foreign Ministry and spent 10 days there and went up to Semipalatinsk with the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and so forth. We were in Almaty the day that the uprising occurred in Kyrgyzstan, and we were in Astana as well. My question is, first of all, I've written extensively about Kazakhstan now, and I describe them as the sleeping giant of Central Asia, which I think they are. First question is President Nazarbayev. Ambassador Jones, you mentioned the concern about his role in the younger generation. My observation is he does not rule with a gentle hand. Second question is corruption. I interviewed several American and Western business leaders there, and I said, I heard corruption's a problem here, and they said, don't ask me about it. It's a big problem. And the third question is China, which you and Martha Alcott mentioned, Kazakhstan's relationship with China. I know there's very great concerns about the Chinese coming into eastern Kazakhstan, investing and so forth. So I'd ask you to, and any of the members of the panel, to discuss those three issues.
Beth, you want to start?
Yes. The question of President Nazarbayev ruling with a gentle hand, I think that I would suggest that needs to be taken in context with the other countries in the region, with other countries in which I spent a lot of time in the Middle East, for instance. For a very long time, it was possible to say that there was no such thing as a political prisoner in Kazakhstan. When President Nazarbayev had difficulty with any of the people around him, they were nominated as ambassadors. Not that Ambassador Idrisov has a problem, but the political, when there was a political opponent, one went to ambassador in Rome, one ambassador in Turkey. So I would say that. Compared to very, very, very many countries in which all of us have either served or worked on, this is not, the harsh hand isn't an issue in Kazakhstan. That would be my view. On the question of corruption, corruption is a serious problem. I think Martha addressed it extremely well in terms of the gaps. I have seen. Well, my prescription for how you address corruption is the rule of law. The more legislation that you can put in place and the more regulation that you can place and implement, the more you can close down the opportunities for corruption to take place, number one. Number two, the more job opportunities there are, the more prosperity there is, the less desire there is, the less need there is for corruption. The more, number two. Number three, the higher the salaries are for people in service positions, police, tax collectors, people like that, the less incentive there is for corruption. These are all issues that are being addressed in Kazakhstan to a far greater degree than I've seen addressed in many, many other countries. It certainly isn't solved, and it certainly doesn't address the question of corruption at the most senior levels. But I think that part of that is part of the discussion that Martha mentioned. There has to be a discussion, and then a decision of what are the national assets, which of the mineral wealth, what of the mineral belong to the people of Kazakhstan, as opposed to a few officials who happen to have a good relationship with the right people. The last on the Chinese, this is part of the policy that I articulated in my conversation, the importance of assuring that there are no political issues with China. I don't know the status of the ability to own land, but can foreigners own land in Kazakhstan? For a very long time, it was impossible to own land.
It is possible.
Not agricultural land.
It is possible.
To own agricultural land?
Yeah, if you establish, if you do it for the agricultural purposes, then you can do partnerships with Kazakhstan.
With partnerships with Kazakhstan, because that becomes an issue of trying to assure that it's not possible for too many Chinese to own too much land in Kazakhstan. That was one of the sensitive issues. But from my perspective, from what I have seen, Kazakhstan has pursued a policy with China that's been very correct. It's been very courageous. It's been very much on the basis of we are equal to China. We have the right to put forward our positions in ways that are in our interests. And I don't see China as a threat to Kazakhstan so long as Kazakhstan and Kazakhstan's leaders have the courage of their convictions in terms of setting forth their own interests as forthrightly as possible, as they do with the United States and as they do with Russia.
A small point on
Martha, would you like to comment on that?
I would just like to disagree on the last tiny bit about China. I mean, I think that it's not a question of diplomatic skill or correctness of policy. China's, as we saw in the last financial crisis when they came in with all that money, China's economic capacity is so great that it is going to be a challenge for Russia and not just the Central Asian countries to balance this capacity with any sort of openness of markets. So, I wish the Kazakhs luck, but it's a challenge for the entire, not just heading west, it's also heading east for Eastern partners. The size of the Chinese economy is just going to be a challenge for everybody to manage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Bill.
Just a quick point on corruption. You may have heard this when you were there. The report that President Nazarbayev's son-in-law, Tulabayev, received a $149 million bribe from a Chinese company seems to have had an effect in Kazakhstan, not necessarily a determinative effect, but it seems to be something that has caused wider concern and cynicism. People don't seem ready for imminent instability, but that particular episode has caused concern.
Right, we have time for one more question. Rafis?
Rafis Abazov, Columbia University. Actually, I have a question specifically to Larry and Martha. And Larry mentioned about international war on terrorism, and Martha mentioned about actually ending international war on terrorism and withdrawing troops from Afghanistan. How will it affect U.S. policy in Central Asia? And what do you expect from Kazakhstan? What kind of role do you expect in Kazakhstan in post-conflict Central Asia? We talk about Greater Central Asia, including Afghanistan. Thank you.
Well, I think, from what I understand about the development of this Northern Distribution Network, that network and Kazakhstan's participation in it is considered and is vital to the NATO effort underway in Afghanistan. The ability to diversify the logistical support for the NATO effort away from simply the route through Pakistan is, by all accounts that I have seen, critical to the effort. And all you have to do is look at a map to see that this network can only work if Kazakhstan is an integral part of it and a supporter of it. But I hope, it's my hope that some of the work that I've seen done on this is that looking beyond the immediate contribution to the NATO logistical effort in trying to stabilize Afghanistan is the possibility that the rules, procedures, the ways of going about business that could come into being surrounding the functioning of this network could, in a later, more tranquil time, if ever such dawns in that region, really could be an important link or a linking mechanism to resurrect the idea of the old Silk Road, that is a network that would link Central and South Asia to the global economy in ways that would be new and different, or at least harken back to a richer age in a new form. So I'm hoping that we have the near-term positive aspect on the effort to stabilize Afghanistan, but then the longer regional piece.
All right. Well, Martha, did you want to?
He asked a question, but I know we're out of time, so I'm happy to.
Well, 40 seconds.
Okay. I was actually making a different point that when the operation in Afghanistan ends, that there will be. I was hoping that there would be a U.S. reevaluation of what how we went about our international business. But I do think, and Ambassador Idrisov's points about what the Kazakhs are trying to do in Kyrgyzstan, if the withdrawal of Afghanistan leads to any sort of security void and higher risk, I mean, there will be a leadership role that the Kazakhs, I would hope, grow into playing, because I think Russia's reactions to Kyrgyzstan shows that this is a role that Russia is not willing to any longer have on its own. And I don't honestly see, I mean, it would be great to have another session under some rubric on the transport and communication, what's likely to come next, but I spent a lot of time schlepping my suitcase across borders by foot, and I really don't see any sort of progress towards real expansion of regional trade, which is clearly an issue that Kazakhstan is both concerned with and would like to, is not the cause of the obstacles, but hasn't been able to affect the solutions.
Jim, another 40 seconds.
Yeah, I just want to make 2 points and maybe sort of in conclusion. We've been talking about history, basically. And what's really going to matter is what's coming and what we ought to be thinking about it. Clearly, we're going to have a generational change of leadership in Central Asia over the coming not too distant future. That's going to be mean that we will face a different set of leaders, and we cannot take for granted that it's just going to be more of the same and it'll all be familiar. And I think it's very important for our leaders and our people to keep in mind that we have to be conscious of the dynamism and change that's going to be going on in this region. Just think back 20 years ago what we're talking about. This is a different part of the world than it was 20 years ago. And it will be a different part 20 years from now. So the question is how that's going to be. And that brings the second point. I think the most frustrating part of my existence when I dealt with this part of the kind of world was the absolute inability of anybody to promote regional cooperation on just about anything. And I do believe that in some sense, if one is thinking about where we ought to be putting our emphasis, and maybe the Afghan experience and some of the other things will contribute to it, it is in creating some sense of mutual regional dependence among these states to give them a better shot at maybe in the next generation doing a better job of cooperation than they have done in this one. Because up to now, it has been a pretty dry well. And we, as I used to say, often suffered from what we had as a policy of terminal bilateralism. And the fact of the matter is, we need to find a way to do more regionally and be effective in a regional context than we've been up to now.
Thank you. That's a great note to end the panel on. I've asked Ambassador Idrisov if he would like to make some closing remarks at this point, and then
another 40 seconds.
Yeah, another 40 seconds.
Well, Bill, I will show here. After all, the festival is about sending a message about the Kazakh culture, right? And Kazakhs are coming from the oral culture, so they're very talkative. Therefore, my 40 seconds will be Kazakh 40 seconds, right? Well, 2 issues which I want to address as the Kazakh representative, corruption and China, which always come in the context of Kazakhstan. And my response will be through the jokes, which will show you how serious we are in understanding these challenges. First, on the corruption, and Kazakhstan is famous for the petty corruption among militia, police, etc., law enforcement, and the joke is that a German, a Ukrainian, and a Kazakh were sent to the uninhabited island, and then they were revisited after a year. So the picture is that a German came to a Ukrainian and says, "Oh, Mikola, you are doing well. In 1 year you have planted something, you have harvested the crop, so you are doing well." And the Ukrainian says, "Oh, Hans, you're also doing well. You develop some cattle, and you built a house, so we did well. Let's celebrate that. We worked very hard over the last year, and we now reap our results, and let's have a nice festivity." They started their celebration with wines on the table, and at that very moment, the door knocks and the door opens, and the Kazakh comes in the same clothes as he was brought there a year ago, saluting them and saying, Let me introduce myself. I'm your local, new local policeman. And on China, it's also it's a big topic. We have the longest historic memory of living with China together, and the joke runs: a Chinese comes to Kazakhstan and asks a Kazakh, local Kazakh, "What's your population?" And a Kazakh very proudly says, "We are 16 million people." And the Chinese replies, "Oh, you must know each other by face then." So, to conclude, I would give my perspective. I was so amazed and thank you for giving me the opportunity to make this exciting journey into our most modern history. When you were talking, giving your perspectives from your tenures in Kazakhstan, I was reliving myself those periods, and it was quite interesting what you thought from the height of your now present positions, and I think that it was in itself a very exciting exercise. On the other hand, I was also amazed to see how your team spirit was displayed here. You have a team leader here, Ambassador Collins, who was one of the first fathers of the post-Soviet policy making in our part of the world, and you who were the implementers on the ground, you were kind of virgin land explorers, right? In a way. And it's quite fascinating to see how the team spirit prevails. Although we of course, differ in our assessments and certain views, I think that one important observation which Ambassador Collins made was a generation change. I think this is the most important thing which we have to recognize and observe. And from my perspective, will tell you that generation change happens not only in Kazakhstan. I observe it in the United States here. Therefore, we have the change message here. And I observe it in Russia, with the new president in Russia. And definitely we are going to experience an important generation change where we will see major qualitative change in our development. Therefore, I agree with Martha that the one good thing which Kazakhstan is doing and its leader is investing in education. Investing in education is preparing that for that generation change. He is not clinging to power. He is trying to make sure that the next generations who come, they are more advanced, better educated, and are able to take the destiny of the country into their hands. This would be, I think, my conclusion, and I am absolutely respectful of the wisdom of the team leader and this team. When Nazarbayev met with Obama a few months ago, he said that we in Kazakhstan sleep under one blanket, but we see different dreams. And Obama laughed, you know, he liked that idiom, and but Nazarbayev said that the important thing is to make sure that, well, the difference of dreams is not a problem. Dreams may be and should be different. The problem or the challenge is to make sure that these dreams are not nightmares, that they are benign dreams, and they have a common thread. So I think that this team has greatly displayed that a variety of dreams which have a common thread of supporting the vision for Kazakhstan, which wants to build a modern, economically prosperous, advanced, educated, liberal, politically plural, well-governed Kazakhstan. I thank you for clearly delivering a message that U.S., both politically, officially at the government level and at the public level, shares that vision with Kazakhstan, and I hope that this will be a very fertile ground for developing U.S.-Kazakh partnerships at all levels. I thank you very much, and please enjoy the reception.
Thank you all for coming, and please move across the hall and partake in the reception.